Welcome back, everybody, to the ND and Free podcast, brought to you by the ND and Free community. We are a worldwide community of NDers who are on a mission to free ourselves from the shame we feel, free from the burden of trying to fit in, and free from the burnout caused from not honouring our needs. Join us each week as we talk all things neurodivergence, including ADHD, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and more. From our one-to-one interviews on the ND and Free Thrive Guide show, which you'll listen to today, and our new flagship ND and Free Wellbeing show, we hope these conversations help fellow NDers across the world to honour their truth. Together, we can move towards a world where we can thrive in a way that best serves our neurotype and supports our nervous system. We are ND and Free. So we are back. I love the new intro, everyone. So we are back with another ND Thrive Guide show, and we have the returning integrative, I can never say that word, therapist, Steph Taker of Therapy with Steph. Steph provides compassionate therapy services tailored to your needs. As a late diagnosed ADHD'er, Steph is passionate about supporting the ND community. Welcome back, Steph. You've been so unbelievably supportive of my social media and everything that I'm doing in the community. I want to thank you so much, and it's so lovely to have you back on.
Oh, thanks for having me, Owen. I'm really excited to be here today as well. And thanks for having me back again. And no, I think it's great. You're really looking forward to seeing the new panel with your ND podcast and the different members that you're having on there. I think it's really good what you're doing, and I enjoy seeing all the posts, and it gives me a boost as well to get my content out there, because I've been a bit AWOL at the minute with different things going on. So seeing your posts, seeing other great content on ADHD and the ND community is what keeps me going and gives me that little push to put content out there.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. What a bonus that can be, I guess. Yeah, help the whole ND and Free family keep on point when it comes to make the videos. But it is very, very important. So I'm really excited to have you back on, mostly because, as we've relaunched with a slightly new mission statement, we're able to now tap into each part of that mission statement. So we've covered community already, and that's what this is. We've got burnout, we've got the burden, and we've got the shame. So today we're going to sort of tap into the burden of trying to fit in, and then kind of losing who we are in the process. Who are we, our self-worth, our identity. So the other side of what is under that mask, that is this beautiful, blossoming human being that we are, which is great. But before we do all that, give some context. People may not have listened to the first episode. I will put the link in the description, everybody, so you can listen to that, so you can hear more of Steph's story. But just briefly give us some context about your own neurotype and how you currently support the ND community.
So, I'm an integrative therapist. I've currently just done my training in EMDR as well, which will be another little tool to add to my services, which is fab for helping with both NT and ND clients. So my neurotype, I was late diagnosed ADHD, and I'm going to be honest with you, Owen, the diagnosis wasn't a shock. I always felt, I'd like to say, a bit out of sync with the world, more so in school and when I was growing up. I kind of felt that I struggled to fit in, struggled to kind of feel accepted, felt very, very like how I was watching other people in the class, remember this quite vividly, and how they would just be getting on with the work and really focusing and taking in what the teacher was saying. I would just be sat here thinking, am I on a different planet here, or what? Am I taking this in? And just didn't feel like I absorbed the information. And it pains me to say this now. It almost made me feel like there's something wrong with me, or I was stupid. But obviously, as a teenager, you just kind of, going through life, cracking on with life. And back then, when I was at school, it was nowhere near as gratefully now that it's so widely spoken about and so much more research, especially with the women and girls with ADHD. It's much more well known and much more well researched. So if anything, I think I would have been a bit more confused if the clinician had said that I didn't have ADHD. I would have been like, okay, so where do I go from here? So I'm combined ADHD, which is all three. Hit the jackpot with that, which I think it's helped me in a way in my practice, as obviously I have lived experience, and in my practice I support ND and NT clients. I'm working in a school at the minute, so I support teens and younger people with ADHD, autism, anxiety, self-worth, and also clients in my private practice, adult clients and young people in private practice. So I do have quite a full, busy work life at the minute, which I'm trying to juggle. I help navigate clients with the self-worth and identity, especially after late diagnosis, as I know there can be a lot of grief around that and a lot of understanding, a lot of shame, a lot of like trying to get a bit of more of a sense of understanding of themselves and how they can move forward with the new diagnosis and the new chapter in their life. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's kind of, you're processing and rebuilding all like in this same moment, aren't you? It's a lot. It's a lot. It's kind of, you feel like you have to grieve first before you could start rebuilding, but it's complicated stuff. Everyone has a different story from that moment. Like, yeah, I knew I had it, but then they still have to go on that journey. Because might have moments like, do I though? You might have like a good day, and you go, maybe it's all a big scam, and
yes,
I'm actually fine.
I completely understand that. Sorry to interrupt, which is very ADHD of me, but I do understand that. That almost thinking, have I been misdiagnosed? Am I getting it right? And with you saying that grief part of it, Owen, and you get this diagnosis and you may have felt that, or the client may have felt that they were already displaying ND traits and struggling with certain aspects of the life and finding it hard to navigate those. When you get the diagnosis, it's almost, for me personally, it was like kind of at least I know now and I can kind of move forward and deal with what I do, and this is my brain and it's not a flaw. But then the months after that and the following weeks after that, then you have to kind of prepare for, well, yeah, this is actually my brain and there's no kind of fixing and there's no magical blueprint to tell you, this is the way we do things. It's about kind of understanding yourself. And that's, I think, very much where that self-worth, identity and the self-acceptance comes into it, because that's where I see most clients struggling. And for myself, I kind of struggled with that as well a little bit. It's like, well, where do I go from here? Because this is me now, even though you've already got an understanding and a feeling of that, your brain does think slightly different, and you're given that diagnosis and you feel that validation, then it's the process going forward of, where do I go with that? And the self-acceptance comes in and the self-worth comes in very much after that, I believe.
Yeah, it sure does, and I love this. We have seamlessly flowed nicely into the topic, so we'll keep flowing through that. And I think what's really interesting is it's in my brain, so I'm going to say it now. It feels like something should be said halfway through, but I'm really fascinated by the brain and wiring, and if we do things enough times, it starts to create neural pathways, which means that thing that you always do becomes even easier because it's such a habitual pattern that your brain kind of wants you to do a bit of auto drive's not quite the right word, but you know what I mean. So you can do stuff behind the scenes without even having to think about it. So that always makes me wonder that if you go 20, 30 years masking and, trying to adjust to your environment and trying to be normal, inverted commas, from what you're seeing, is that you're actually training your brain as well to create these new habits, which become kind of who you are, but not really, because you've had to bring in this skill that isn't really that helpful in the long term, and now it becomes who you are. And I think that's part of maybe why we get lost, is that we're having to figure out who we are from a self-awareness and a self-reflective lens, but also our brain is going to kind of force us to do the things that we've always done, which are ND plastering, I guess, and we're trying to make things easier. So what your thoughts there is that there's kind of some science here to the brain as well. We're also having to work on retraining the brain, but if you don't know what you're doing, you haven't got any help, what does that even look like,
I mean, when you think about trying to fit in with different groups, maybe you're masking at work, maybe you're masking at school, maybe you're masking heavily in friendships and relationships, trying to fit in can slowly disconnect us from ourselves. And for many ND people, including myself, I think fitting in isn't about belonging. It almost become a survival mechanism in some sense. And for me, trying to fit in meant constantly kind of, scanning the room, reading the room, adjusting how much I spoke, how little I spoke, when I should be like kind of jumping in, when I shouldn't interrupt, just like I interrupted you a bit earlier, Owen, and how I showed up and how I reacted. And over time, like you said, with this kind of training your brain in these neural pathways, you are creating habitual patterns and thought patterns and the way we I don't know, the way we perform in life almost. And I think that does something to your sense of self. You stop trusting your natural responses. You start questioning whether you're too much or you're not enough. And sometimes both at the same time. When fitting becomes a survival strategy, identity can get lost along the way. And if you're so busy managing how you're perceived or how you're coming across or whether you're talking too much or have I said the wrong thing, there's very little space left to ask who you are, who you actually are. And it almost becomes like your identity, I guess.
Yeah, it just made me think, if you said to somebody who was going on that journey post-diagnosis, here's a situation, here's an environment you're in, here's the scenario. What would you do what would you naturally just do? Don't, not the performing, not the, but if obviously that's all they know, but really try and get somebody to figure out what they naturally would do. For me personally, I find that very difficult. What would you naturally want to say? What would your natural behavior be? And to be honest, I don't really know. It's been, because you've been performing for so long that you're probably the best actor in the world.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, sorry, Owen, to interrupt. If you think about it, masking can look like constantly scanning rooms, monitoring tone, adjusting your speech. And over time, you stop trusting your instincts. You start asking, am I too much? Am I not enough? Did I get that wrong? And I feel when you talk about the neural pathways, I feel with that masking in different situations and checking in and scanning yourself and am I stood right? Am I saying too much? All of the things that will be going through someone's mind with ND. I'm not speaking for everybody here. Everybody's very different. Your identity, I feel, becomes a bit diluted. And instead of who am I, it becomes who do I need to be to stay accepted? And that pressure can erode self-worth before you even realise it. And in my work, I help people notice those patterns and start untangling the coping strategies. Once they've had that late diagnosis and they understand that they've been masking, because I have some clients come to me, and for myself personally, I don't know how you've experienced this, Owen. When you talk about masking, you said something before about if I was to be asked, what would you say naturally? What would come to you naturally in these situations? And you said you would struggle with that. If you've been masking for such a long time, to drop that mask almost feels like, I'm kind of dropping a part of myself there. It almost becomes your identity. I don't know how you feel about that, but I feel with clients that can be a tricky part of the work is kind of understanding who they are and getting to the point of some form of self-acceptance that this is okay, and maybe checking in, when do I notice I'm masking? When am I being heavily critical? When am I scanning the room? When am I monitoring myself? So untangling those coping strategies from authentic self-expression, it's not instant, it's not neat, but it creates room for people to reconnect with themselves.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I think when it comes to sense of self, it's if you can have that sort of compassionate self-awareness that we talk about a lot, is to be able to see, I notice, I'm doing a lot of scanning in the schoolyard. I always use the schoolyard because I hate it. So it's such a perfect place where I'm looking around, looking at all different parents, what they're doing. Oh God, I think I used to talk to them, but now my stepson doesn't hang out with their kid as much now. And my brain just going wild. Like, should I speak to them or should I stand over here? Then when I'm on the way there, shall I find a spot, where it doesn't look like I'm being rude? It's exhausting.
Yeah, it is exhausting.
All that scripting and scanning, what do they think, which you've had to also absorb over time to make sure that you aren't the bad guy or looking weird, on top of what shall I say. You've got two things happening at once there. And I think having the self-awareness to say, like I've just said then, I know all those things. And that's probably the first skill to maybe try to cultivate, is like to notice all those things, feel feet on the floor, get grounded, look at maybe the tree in the wind, and sort of bring your awareness to that. I think that's all you've really got to begin with to pull yourself out, you know?
Yeah, kind of bring yourself back to the present almost. And I know sometimes that's really, really difficult, especially when you're in that kind of spiraling spot. And using the schoolyard is a perfect example because I don't have to do that now. But when I did, all of those things that you were just saying, I can completely relate to. You know, should I be stood over here? Do I need to speak to this person? Is it going to look rude if I just want to keep myself to myself? And it can become exhausting. And when you're almost in that spiral, it can be quite hard to pull yourself out if you don't really have, you know, you don't really talk it through. It's the way you've always been. You know, you've used these masking and these coping strategies. Again, going back to that kind of neural pathways and those habits that we create, little by little, working with clients and trying to untangle those masking tendencies that we have and those kind of behaviors that we have and those almost checking in and being very critical and trying to reframe them slightly and looking where it happens the most. You know, what are the triggers? Getting an understanding of that and checking in with yourself can start to slowly, you know, change those neural pathways along the way and build newer habits.
Exactly. If you keep feeling your feet on the floor, if you keep looking at the tree in the wind every single time, so you meet that input of sensory input every time in that way, your body's like, this scenario, this part of my brain, the signals I'm sending, the chemicals got being released, keeps happening over and over and over again. All we really have is the ability to become what we repeatedly do, which with neurodivergence can be a little bit trickier, obviously, because our brain's kind of running wild, our nervous system is running wild, and it needs us. I always think that you have to befriend, you have to become a friend of your brain and nervous system. It needs us, and you have to tend to it. And I know it's annoying. I hate having to, in many ways, having to tend to my brain and nervous system every day. But now I'm trying to look at that language. I keep saying I hate having to do it. That's not good language. That's not loving language. So you with all the self-awareness, you can keep bringing it back. Oh my God, I notice I keep saying hate. And before you know it, you're actually starting to picture or lay out your ND masking self. They're all the things that I do. I know now. Awesome. So what would happen if I met it differently? And that can be hard.
With a bit of compassion, you know, that part of you as the part of you that's masked for all those years before your diagnosis, the part of you that might still mask now. In one way, as annoying it can be, and as much as our thoughts can spiral, that's been doing its job. You know, that's been doing its job to protect you from maybe the fear of like rejection or the fear of kind of saying the wrong thing or getting something wrong. And I'm not just talking about you specifically here, Owen, I'm talking about as a general rule. You know, that masking and those habits and those protections that we've had, those kind of, that part of us has tried to protect us for such a long time, we almost become quite critical to that part of ourselves. Like, you know, why am I checking in? I hate having to check in with my, you know, my brain and my nervous system and kind of have to reset myself all the time, or maybe have to over prepare before I'm going to a social event and almost checking that I'm not scanning too much, I'm not doing this. And you can almost become a little bit critical. But if we look, like you just said, of the masking part of us, or the part of us that's tried to protect us from making mistakes, doing things wrong, you know, being unaccepted in some social situations, so to speak, and showing that part some compassion, that's all it's ever known. That's all it's ever known. You know, it's only known how to keep you safe. So if you're doing this habit and that masking and those habits are still kind of keeping you going, then how I work with clients is trying to get them to look at that part, you know, the ADHD part, because it's only a part of us. It doesn't make up the whole of us. It doesn't make up the whole of Steph. I'm pretty sure there's lots of different parts to you, Owen, you know, that make you up. And looking at the part with a bit of compassion and understanding a little bit more can definitely start chipping away at that self-critical part and start to slowly work towards building that self-acceptance.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said self-acceptance as well. And sort of this, there is a sense of, unfortunately, in some ways, but also beautifully, a radical acceptance, as they call it. So it has to get to a point where we have to somehow compassionately accept this is what we're working with. It's tricky, and I smile because I'm in that at the moment. It's really lovely. So this sort of real, and the more you do that, the more you have this radical acceptance around the truth and the fact of what's happening, the more you can start liberating yourself a little bit more and say, actually, do you know what? I'm a good person and I really care about people, and that's my baseline value. I'm sure a lot of them say that, and that's all you need to begin with, is to know that you want to be good. You want to be good out in the world. It's a bit like from a religious standpoint. If you're a humanist and you're not following a particular religion, you believe to be good to other humans. You'd like to hope we all feel that way. And that's where you start, right? And then as far as the rest of it goes, you'll start to learn, what do I really love? What am I passionate about? What activities do I really like? And by going on that journey, that's how you would rebuild. Because like you said, who are we? We're not just ND. And I know I'm turning my ND into this big mission statement and social media thing and everything else. But behind the scenes, I've got all the different things that I'm into that other NDers are not into. And it's not because I'm ND and obsessed with it. I actually quite like it. Whatever the thing I'm obsessed with is, I love it. And that's part of who I am too. And it's something I can talk about. I always think in a schoolyard, I hate small talk, no thank you, but I can't go back to them and say, hey, where did you grow up? How was your parenting? What did that lead to in your 20s? You can't do that. So all you're really left with is the small talk. So at least I have loads of things that I'm into. So I say, oh, did you watch the football last night? And I'm happy to then go into depth about the football and talk about the psychology of a football player. At least I've sort of got a gateway there. But going in, knowing what I'm into and what I love can give me maybe some topics that make me feel a bit more comfortable. And that's very basic and a bit watered down, but it's kind of true, isn't it? Is kind of when you know what you love and what you care about and what you value, it can lead to some conversation perhaps that feels quite nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so more or less like taking it away from the superficial side of it, having that small talk can feel quite superficial, can't it? And not as much in depth, but the fact that you have all those different parts of you that enjoy different things, and it's not just you, Owen, and ND, and you don't like small talk and you're struggling in the playground, you still have lots of other parts of you that can come to the surface and I was going to say perform in that way, but we're not performing, we're not masking, because that's the real parts of you.
Yeah, it's so true. And I love this topic. As you can tell, I'm really getting into it because this is so fresh for me right now with the school stuff. But I've found my way of doing the school run. I've sculpted it and it works really well for me. And it's all about boundaries. And to be honest, who gives a shit how I do my school run? So I know exactly where to stand now. It's the perfect spot. It's kind of not far away, but it's perfect. I don't stand in the queue. I stand across the road. Who cares? I keep saying, who cares? And I walk in as they all start to go in. He comes out and we go. I don't like all the noise and the crowds, but I've mastered it. I figured it out. I don't care if they think I'm rude. Why am I not saying, I'll say hello. And I'm trying to get to radical acceptance. I don't care. This is what I need in this moment. And it feels very special. I do have every day, they think I'm rude, but you just work with that neural pathway over time, But I think if we can have boundaries, know what we need, and just set up in the way that we want to. And that's part of the journey, I think, of post-diagnosis as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think post-diagnosis, not only are you trying to kind of almost get your head around that diagnosis, and like I said, it wasn't a shock to me. I genuinely would have been shocked, and I probably would have been a lot more confused and not known what to do with the information if they would have gone, Steph, you don't have ADHD. I would have struggled with that more. So I don't know about you, Owen, but after my diagnosis, I felt quite validated, and I felt, right, so there's nothing wrong with me. And it came back to, there's nothing wrong with me. I am okay. I'm not kind of stupid, or I'm not struggling, or no, all these other people that I think have got this manual of life and have everything figured out. The reasons why I don't feel like that, or I've compared myself so much to how others are managing life. There's a reason for it. And that for me was very much the validation. But as I said, after weeks and months follow, there's a reason for it. And then it's kind of coming to terms with that reason is always going to be there. There's no kind of like quick fix or, magical blueprint, like I said before. But there are ways of managing, there are ways of checking in with yourself. There are ways of kind of untangling those coping mechanisms that we've had before, and those coping strategies and starting to understand yourself. I think when you have that knowledge and you have the space, which hopefully I offer to my clients, to be seen and to be validated, to be completely as you are and not feel judged and accepted, I think that is powerful in itself.
Yeah, I love that so much. I think it's empowerment, isn't it? Empowerment's such a good word. Is that,
Most definitely.
you know, we may have been scripting a lot, you know, scripting before social events, what we're going to say. That's cool. That's something you've been using. It's quite a useful tool, keeps you safe, makes you feel a little bit more comfortable in your skin. I mean, that's kind of like a really, really cool friend you got going on in your brain. But how can you then use that to your benefit? So if you're so good at scripting, then you're probably going to be pretty decent at prepping how you're going to approach the situation too, in an empowered way. You know, this is what I need. This is what I'm going to do. So maybe we can use these skills that have been kind of, we may think of them as a bad thing, but maybe we could use them to empower ourselves as well. But you need sense of self for that. You need to know that you're worthy, which is our next question, segue, is know that we're worth that effort. We're worth spending time setting ourselves up in a really compassionate way for a social event, that we're worthy of love and tender care to ourselves. We're worthy of rest. I don't know about a lot of the NDers listening, but I know I need a lot of rest in between activities, lots of transition time. But for me to do that on some level, other than impulsivity, is I need to feel worthy of that. I am allowed to rest. It sounds bizarre. People are like, what are you talking about? But I think it's a common thing in the community, is that because our sense of self is low and we may not feel that sense of self-worth and that we deserve things because we've been spoken to, it's hard to engage in the activities that will really help us, which is kind of really heartbreaking in a way. So I hand over to you, but that's my first thing when I think of worthiness, is that am I worthy to actually take care of me?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you said that, because when I was listening to you talking about the rest, I was very much relating it to myself. With, I don't know about you, Owen, but I don't really notice when I'm starting to burn out, because I'm always doing, and that feeling of not being productive or not doing enough, or I should be doing more. When we are listening to our bodies and we are taking rest, that comes up in sessions a lot with my clients, with ND in particular. This kind of productivity anxiety, you know, if I'm not doing, I'm therefore failing. If I'm not constantly being productive, if I'm sat down and watching TV, God forbid. I mean, in all fairness, some of my clients do struggle with just sitting, because they have abundance of energy. They might have the hyperactivity part of or impulsivity part of ADHD. Even the inattentive, to sit still and be, you know, feel comfortable in that, can feel very unfamiliar, and it can feel unsettling for some of my clients. You know, they've often said that they get this sense of dread, or this fear of like judgment, that they should be doing more. So it's almost about listening to your body and noticing where that little voice comes from, what part of them, you know, whether it's an inner critic, or what part of them is telling them that they're not worthy of, you know, taking rest, or they're not worthy of taking some time out for them.
Yes, it's such an interesting one. And there's kind of this why can't sort of language as well. You know, this is one of my biggest things. Why can't I just stop? So, you know, you're hyper focused, you do something you really love, and in your head, I'm going to keep going. This is great. I'm really passionate about it. I don't need to stop. But the truth is, you do need to bloody stop. Otherwise, you're going to get so overstimulated that you're going to, for me personally, now I'll become irritable after that. And then I become not the pleasant person, the true, authentic, pleasant being that I am. I become this irritable person around people. And then I think, oh, I'm a piece of shit. So then you go around in a circle, all because of this language around why can't I, which I don't think is very useful. It's, I know, setting the alarm on your wind up clock or whatever and saying, you know, I'm going to stop then because I think it's really, really important for me to have some transition time. You have to start changing the language, and not just, because if I say, why can't I'll just keep going. It's actually the opposite.
It's almost like it's almost giving you that push then to think, well, no, I can. Is that what you mean? Like that kind of internal?
Yeah, that, but also, why can't I is the kind of language where I'm being derogatory. I'm being judgmental of me, which then puts me further into my nervous system, into fight and flight, maybe into a bit of dorsal vagal shame. And then when you feel like that, you won't want to rest because you're going to be sat with those horrible sensations in your nervous system that are uncomfortable in silence, for example. So you go in a bit of a loop. So it's like just honoring, I'm going to do this much. I'm really, really care about myself. I'm going to make sure I really put some compassionate breaks in by setting a clock. And the clock is my guide. It's my angel, is my protector. Do you know what I mean? That's how I feel. As soon as you use that language, it actually impacts your nervous system because you're using negative language, which your body will respond to, whether we like it or not. The way we think, if we think negatively or speak negatively, it does actually have a physiological response on your body.
Oh, massively.
So, yeah, anyway, there's lots in there. Back to you.
I mean, I talk about that with my clients about the window of tolerance. You're probably familiar with the window of tolerance. You can be either in hyperarousal or hypoarousal. And the idea of the window of tolerance is where we kind of need to be if we're, looking at working ourselves over or becoming overwhelmed or doing too much and not resting when we need to, or taking too much on, or becoming really dysregulated or stressed. Being in the window of tolerance is doing the things that kind of bring us back down to balance us out, so in homeostasis sort of status where we are feeling more calm, more connected with ourselves. So it could be something like, I don't know about passions that you have, but something that you're really interested in where you feel calm, you're not getting stressed, you're not getting agitated. So it could be for someone, having a bath for 30 to 40 minutes, or reading for an hour, or listening to an audible and getting outside and walking in nature. And they know that will bring them into what's called that window of tolerance. So they're kind of avoiding spilling out over the top into the hyperarousal, which makes us feel agitated, anxious, and, on the go and spiraling thoughts, or that hypoarousal, what you were just talking about, Owen, where you can feel kind of flat and numb, and those type of things, what you were just saying about being overly critical to yourself and kind of being harsh, saying, I can't do this, I can't do this, why can't I do this, can make you feel, a low sense of worth, incapable almost, and then that kind of inner critic starts to come in. I mean, before my diagnosis, I think a lot of my self-worth was tied to effort and how hard I tried at things and how much I compensated and how well I could do that whilst holding everything else together. And that was the underlying belief that if things felt hard, it must be a personal failing, and my diagnosis didn't magically fix that, but it gave me context. And the context, I believe, and the understanding going forward starts to reduce the shame little by little, and the shame we feel of not being able to keep up, not being able to kind of do life or manage life like everybody else is doing around you, which some people, I've definitely thought that in the past. I've definitely compared myself to, how are they doing that? How are they getting out the door in the morning and being super productive without having a little mini meltdown on the way? And I think something I've experienced deeply is RSD. I don't know whether that rings truth to you, but I think a big part of self-worth people in the ND community, RSD, it plays a massive part of that. And if we look at RSD, this isn't just taking things personally or being too sensitive. It's an intense nervous system response. Your vagus nerve is involved, which can make your heart race, your stomach knot, your body tense up before your brain even has chance to catch up. I'm trying to think of an example. I can think of an example I can give you when this happened to me probably about a year or so ago. I started this work at a school and I got an email. The head wants to see you. And that was it. And I was like, okay. And I kind of sat with that, and then the thoughts started to spiral. So then obviously I get onto the WhatsApp group and start messaging my other therapy colleagues, have you been asked to see your head at your school? No. So all night I was spiraling, what have I done wrong? I've done something wrong. The imposter syndrome was like up here. And people might think, well, you're a therapist, Steph. Why are you struggling with these things? Just because I'm a therapist and just because I'm, trained in what I do and I'm really passionate in what I do, it doesn't take away the fact that I still do and I'm trying to manage my own ADHD brain and my own ADHD traits. I'm miles better than I was before my diagnosis, but I still do have RSD popping up. It's very real for me, and it can be very intense. And I think with my clients, when they come to me with they've been told they're being too sensitive, or they will struggle with conversations, especially in social events with particular clients that I work with, they will come away from there and the thoughts will start to spiral, and they'll feel so much shame and so much criticism towards themselves of, did I say something wrong? You know, how was I being too much? Was I interrupting? Was I... So I think very much that is a constant kind of battle between building your self-worth and trying to get an understanding of how RSD works and how RSD can show up. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, or whether you've experienced it yourself, Owen, but it's very much real and very apparent with a lot of the ND clients that I work with.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. And I think it's very common. Yeah, I've had plenty of people on the show talking about this. And I think my first technique for this sort of thing is to acknowledge that as far as neurodivergence goes, across many of them, it's we feel things more deeply and we feel things more intensely. Keep it nice and simple. We feel what would naturally be felt on a much lower level for a lot of people based on their background experiences, but we times it by 10. And I keep it really simple to begin with, because then I don't identify with it too much. It's like, yeah, I'm going to feel things deeply. That's what my nervous system does. But then you still got to deal with the fire as it unfolds, and it releases into your gut and all things, and our brain fires up. But I think with things like RSD and stuff is that, like we're talking about today, it does start to take a toll after a while. If it keeps happening, you are then going to start thinking, Jesus, I can't do life.
Yeah.
I can't cope. Mm-hmm. And a really important message around all of this, because it's a word I haven't used too much, but I noticed it a lot in my life in the last few months. My partner mentioned it as well, is avoidance. So what tends to happen over time is the more RSD we feel, the more avoidant we start to become. Then we start not living properly, and we'll avoid things, we'll avoid events, we'll avoid family, we'll avoid certain parts of our work, we will avoid going for promotion, we will avoid so many things where your life gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and you lose who you are because you're not even engaging in things you enjoy anymore, because there potentially could be some RSD involved in that enjoyment activity, like a club that you went to and some big event happened, you got RSD and you stopped going, but it's such a beautiful thing that you were doing.
Yeah, it's such a shame when you talk about it like that, because it's such a block to people's potential, and we've got to look at the ND brain as well, of how amazing and unique and how creative and fast thinking and all those ideas that we have, and it can almost be blocked by that potential and blocked by moving forward with that because of the traits of like RSD. If you don't know it's a nervous system reaction, you haven't known that RSD is a nervous system reaction, you can start to believe there's something wrong with you. Your value, your competence, your identity. So in therapy, I will help clients recognize that these moments are nervous system responses. It's not who you are. This is what's kind of happened over the time of living with ND. And noticing them as nervous system responses instead of moral failings, and understanding the RSD gives much more context. And it doesn't erase the intensity when it happens, but it does create a way to respond to yourself with less self-blame and less coming away from those social events or coming away from those situations with less shame. And I believe RSD and self-worth are closely connected. With when every small interaction can feel like a threat, it's very easy, like you said before, to start doubting your value. You just give a perfect example about maybe going to a social event or a club, something that you really enjoyed, but there was a situation there where your RSD kicked in and you come away feeling some type of shame. So then you start to go to the avoidance type behaviors, and that can almost spiral into making you feel, that there is something wrong. So within my work, helping people untangle and identify these intense emotional reactions is central to help them notice the patterns and validate their experience and find little ways to check in with themselves, small, real practices, not these huge grand solutions, because like you say, these have been very much part of your life and coping with ND for such a long time, whether it's post-diagnosis or before diagnosis.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think it's kind of I love that you're talking about how the body is kind of kicking in the couple of split seconds before your brain has a chance to make sense of it all. And it's so important that people understand that what I was really excited about, little tangent here, is Ned Halloway did a really cool Instagram post about how far we've come in 2026 where we are. And he was talking about that we're finally getting to a place where the wider community is accepting that neurodivergence isn't just a brain thing. It's a body thing. It's a nervous system thing. They're saying that the nervous system plays a huge part in how we experience our life. And RSD is very much a nervous system thing. How we think about being rejected from our brain perspective and our thoughts. Fine, that's one thing. But RSD is felt in your body. In theory, I don't know. That's just but you know,
no, it can be very visceral for some people. My clients experience really visceral, like almost feels painful. You know, if they have a perception of how someone's responded to them, you know, maybe it might be something at work, and they say, "Yeah, this is good, but you could have done X, Y, and Z, and it could have been better than these." That could be taken away as well. Can't really see that part, and what the client might go to is they see all the parts, the X, Y, and Z that they could have done better, as a very visceral response, a very visceral body response as, well, I'm not good enough. I'm obviously failing at this. I'm not capable of doing the work that my manager is judging in some way. So yeah, I completely agree. It can be a very physical response.
Yeah, thank you. And it's kind of like the sense of regulation, you know, you're trying to just regulate your body. Most of the time, spend a lot of time doing that. You know, it can be quite tiring, hence why we need these breaks. But I feel like there's a loop that gets created. So you have a physical sensation that makes you think a certain way, behave a certain way, become avoidant, then you lose who you are, then you loop back around and you're going around in this circle, and you have to try and break that circle by coming back to who you truly are and knowing that you're good enough for many things, including self-care. And that our next question was around values, authenticity, and knowing our truth. And I think, like we said about that club, something happens, you don't go back. You're losing a little piece of who you truly are, connecting to that community or that project or that passion, which is really, really hard. And I think, but that's a good place to start, though. It's like, oh, what have you done throughout your lifetime? What is a common denominator? What do you keep getting drawn back to, even if you try and avoid it? That's a good place to say, oh my God, like, yeah, that makes me glow. That brings joy to my life. And then following that, you know?
It almost starts, I think, as well, Owen. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's a really good example to give, you know, and looking at what makes us kind of glow, as you said, and what kind of makes us thrive, what gives us that like drive and that passion and brings us back. And some of those things you can end up avoiding, like with traits of RSD, but it's almost like starting to notice, like, when do you feel most yourself, or when am I exhausted from pretending or masking? Where do I feel safe enough? And late diagnosis can often mean that you have to untangle who you are from who you became to cope. And this can take time. And I don't think living your truth means having everything figured out at all. I think sometimes it just means listening to yourself and what's important, those things that make you, you know, glow, like you said, those things that you're passionate about. And for the first time, without immediately trying to override it, I think just listening and checking in with yourself is vital. And I think sometimes that sounds really simple, but I think if we don't have that perspective and we don't have that context of that is important, it can feel very much like, you know, just checking in with myself. I mean, what's that really going to do? But if we're so busy about wondering what other people are thinking about us, or how we're performing, or how we're coming across, we very much lose sense of self. We very much lose who we are. So that is when it's important to start checking in. And part of my work is helping clients separate who they are from who they've learned to be to survive. So we look at patterns of coping, expectations and self-judgment, and slowly start to untangle them. And I don't think living your truth necessarily means being the same everywhere. I believe it means personally aligning with yourself where you can, and not shaming yourself when you can't do that. You know, when you have to pull yourself from a social event, or when you don't really feel up to being, you know, actively social and you need time to rest. That's important to you as well. And those are the types of coping strategies I mean with checking in with yourself, knowing when it's right for you to be social or do what lights you up, and when you feel you need to bring yourself away and rest.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, a lot of people do struggle to know what their values are, what values even are. So when I did my acceptance commitment therapy training, which is all about values and underpinned by that, is some people don't know what a value is. And it can be a bit confusing. So we always like to say, what's important to you, no matter what, and leaning into that. So rather than seeing it as in what's a value, what is important to me. So if it's important for you to not say to somebody in conversation, shut up, leave me alone, of course you're not going to do that. Your value is to not do that. Your value is to be kind and use nice words. So it's just knowing what is important to you. So prime example, everybody, because this is something I'm very aware of, is if it's important to you, it's a value of yours to be in nature, to go into nature, to connect to nature. You love to be outside. It fills your cup back up. You feel great. Are you doing that every day? And if you say, I haven't gone for a couple of months, I used to love hiking. I don't do it anymore. So why did you stop hiking? Because it's so important to them to be in nature, but they've stopped doing it. And those things that we care about and we think are important underpin who we are as a person, what we're passionate about, what we believe in. That's how you get your sense of self rebuilt. And I think because of avoidant behavior, we are then avoiding, if we avoid going out because we get overstimulated, completely fair enough, especially from an autistic part of things, it means you're not getting any nature anymore because you're avoiding something else, which is directly impacting a value of yours, which is nature. So how can you get into nature without the oversensory experience of being outside? Steph can see all the plants behind me, everyone. I've got my beautiful family of plants, and that is nature right there. So if I can't go out that day, I'll walk around, I'll feel all the textures of the stuff. I've got some new succulents behind me, which are doing really well. So that's a clever hack, right? For me to get access to nature and live my values. So is that kind of good of example?
It is. That's a really good example. Thanks for sharing that, Owen. And with what you said there, with your ACTS training, that people sometimes don't understand what the values are, or struggle to kind of know what's important to them. That's very much part of the work I do, and very much something that I see time and time again in my practice, is that you ask someone what their values are, or what's important to them, or what they like and what lights them up. 9 times out of 10, they can give one or two, maybe one. Some people really struggle with that, and checking in with themselves and going, what is really important to me? Because like you say, with all that going on with our coping strategies, RSD, masking, dealing with all of that, can very much lose your sense of self. So it's practical and incremental, those little suggestions that we do, kind of checking in with what's important for the client, checking in what the values are, or what lights them up. So I often suggest small experiments, like choosing environments where they might feel safe. You just said you love hiking, you like to get out in nature, but sometimes you might not be able to do that. So you've, cleverly just made your own little nature landscape in the background, and that works for you. So choosing experiments, and choosing little experiments sounds a bit intense. Choosing little challenges with clients, and experiencing with how much they mask, and noticing when their body is kind of signaling stress. And over time, those small steps, those kind of looking and rechecking in with their values, or what lights them up and what's good for them, and what gives them their feeling of sense of self, what makes that stronger. Over time, those little steps help to rebuild the identity, which then follows rebuilding the self-worth and acceptance.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, things that we care about and we feel a lot of joy around is sometimes you could sit there and do some self-reflection. Say, what have I done over the years that I used to love? Okay. Am I still doing that? How would it feel if I brought it back? I mean, this is all things that, take a lot of, reflection and sitting down, taking time to do that. But, I used to be a big runner. I used to do half marathon events every other week, every other month. I used to love it for years, running. It's probably the most regulated I've ever been in my life. But I think it's because I was working part-time. I was constantly moving my body, and we know how important that can be for a lot of NDers. Doing something I'm passionate about, beating my times, having purpose, enjoying the events, meeting new friends that are runners, eating really well. If I sit here and think to myself, would I like to run now? Probably not. So it was a very big, important thing to me back then. But what I do take from that is I wish I could move more. I wish I could do more exercise. So there is bits in there that I value. I value doing the exercise and keep my body fit and healthy. So again, I've got some information, even though I don't need to run, but I can do those things. I think it's just tapping into things that you think are important. Would you like to bring back or not? At least you're doing some reflective work, just to get a sense of what you care about. I've got hundreds of examples, but I'm not going to do them due to time. But it's powerful, isn't it? I think once you start doing that sort of work, you can start to rebuild a bit. And then when you do go to that schoolyard, you're such more empowered in your body, and hopefully it will ease off some of these intense emotions that we feel. Hopefully.
It's not about really, I said before, I give an example of me kind of having, after my diagnosis, and how a lot of clients that I work with feel after their diagnosis. It's almost like that light bulb moment. Great, I've got the validation. I know this is the reason why I've been struggling with certain things, or why I've been having difficulty navigating real life issues. But then the acceptance of the ADHD diagnosis or ND diagnosis comes into play, and then that's when the real feelings can start to kick in and think, okay, right, so this is my brain, how are we going to work with this? And start to almost understand and get context of that and check in with what's important to you. I know you just spoke about running, and that was a chapter of your life that, really helped you and give you a lot of benefit for managing your MD. So it's almost about checking in with what's worked for clients, what makes them feel more like them. When do they feel like safe enough to be who they really are, if they even know that? Because like you said, we come to a point in our lives when we've been dealing with ND for such a long time. Maybe people are diagnosed earlier, and that's a different story altogether. But for people who are late diagnosed specifically, if you've been living your life as an ND'er and taking on these coping strategies and learning to navigate in the best way that you can, because if you think about it, ND brains are not built for NT life, should I say? I don't know whether I'm going to get backlash for saying that, but I think we're not kind of built for. How do I put it? We're not. It's not like we're not built. It's our brains deal with things very, very differently to the way a neurotypical person would, so to speak. I went right around the houses with that, Owen. I was trying to get my words and got completely muddled up along the way, but here we are. So yeah, I just think that living your truth doesn't mean being the same everywhere, and going back and rechecking in, like you said, with what lit you up then might not be what kind of is good for you now. It might change slightly, and how can we work with that? How can we introduce those little parts back in to keep you in your window of tolerance, keep you regulated, so you're not overspilling into, I should be doing more, and feeling that kind of shame of whether that's resting or whether that's taking time for themselves or being kind to yourself.
Yeah, so true. Thank you. And that kind of is the perfect way to have finished on the main questions there, which is about honoring. How do we honor out there in the world? And what you said there was really, really powerful. And I think honoring I like that. It's such a nice word, isn't it? Honoring in this moment, what do we need? And it could be, you're not in your body. You've left your body. Your mind's been going running wild and you're no longer grounded. So I honor my body by giving my arms a little squeeze. I'm doing that. It feels really nice. And that's just me honoring. I'm honoring my body, honoring this moment. I think that's really beautiful. I think, and a lot of we said today, can't recap all of it, but I think we've covered this nice sort of start, middle, finish to the rebuild and finding out who we are. So before we finish up, is there anything you've missed off your list there on your notes, or are we all good?
No, I'll just, I think with what you said about honouring ND, I believe it doesn't have to be dramatic, but it can just be about adjusting energy around tasks, and rather than comparing yourself to others, allowing rest without guilt, and asking for accommodations without apology, or choosing spaces where you don't have to mask constantly. And in therapy, I help people recognise that struggling in systems that weren't designed for them isn't failure, which is what I was trying to say before. and it's normal. It's normal. It's normal. It's normal to whoever's experiencing that time.
Certainly is, and they talk about reasonable adjustments, don't they, like in the workplace? So why not reasonable adjustments for your daily life, for yourself?
Exactly.
What is a reasonable adjustment? It's not like we're asking for the world to completely change for us, like we're talking about. The world isn't built in a way that is flexible enough for all neurotypes. It's kind of, that just came to me then as a way of saying it. But it's, reasonable adjustments, like I do in the schoolyard. I found my little spot, and it really works for me.
Perfect example.
What's wrong with that? And there is an element of trying to get to a not care in a compassionate way type situation.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, guys, just finish up. Most people, they're not even thinking about you. You think they are. They don't even know you're there. They're not acknowledging your existence. You could be stood right next to them. They could be worrying about their own stuff. Very few people are actually looking at you and going, they're being, he doesn't seem very nice. Who's doing that? Not many people. So use that as a fun way of thinking about things.
Yeah, it can be your own narrative, can't it?
Yeah. They say what people think about you is none of your business. I can't really get on board with it because that doesn't sound right in my brain, but apparently that's true. It's none of your business what they think about you, really. Just live your own life. Try and tell that to us NDers. Then it's a bit that. Yeah. But it's a good place to wrap up there. But just before we go, you've done one of these already before, Steph, but we'll whiz through them. So I'm going to give you the new question. I don't think you did this, which is, what is a key moment or an achievement you were most proud of before you knew you were ND? And now you look back, you're like, Jesus, how did I do that considering I was ND? Have you got anything like that?
Oh, I don't think I did answer this before, but I think I would say I probably wouldn't tend to think in terms of achievements in the usual sense. I think one of the bigger shifts that came for me after diagnosis was learning about ADHD and how it impacts and how I manage it and my nervous system, including RSD. And for years, struggling with time and getting out the door and hyper-focusing or spiraling with the smallest triggers that might seem completely insignificant to some people, really felt like blocks for me, like I wasn't reaching my potential. I know we touched on this before. It almost felt like I knew what I wanted to do and I had all these ideas and, sometimes I completed them, sometimes I didn't. But now I see those patterns differently and understanding RSD, understanding ADHD, and that my nervous system helps recognise that those intense reactions, they aren't failings, and that some of what I once thought were barriers for me can actually inform how I work with others. So I am really proud of that. Not because it's me having everything figured out all of a sudden, because I support people in that space and I'm not perfect in any way, shape or form, but because it lets me hold space for clients. And a lot of people come to therapy feeling, broken or feeling misunderstood or not feeling heard or judged in some way. And I hope that I can offer a place where they are heard, validated and understood, because I've navigated similar struggles myself, and that means more to me than kind of any almost like physical achievement. It feels very much more meaningful to me that I get to do that.
Yeah, that's so lovely. Thank you so much. I could definitely carry on that conversation. So I'll leave it there. But yeah, thank you. That's great. And I've heard loads of different things so far, and it's been really, really interesting, really cool. So I'm really glad I've added the question in, because I want people at home to do the same thing. Before you knew, look back now and like pick something out where you're like, oh, Jesus, wow, okay. That's so cool that I did that, or I got through it, or I've got to this point today, and I'm really proud of that. It's really beautiful. So your parting message, Steph, you've done this once already. I'm not going to go back and check, give you a test, but see if it's different or the same. But what would be your parting message to the audience about how we're fine, we're great human beings, everything's going to be okay, and moving forward with hope and all that kind of good stuff? What would be your message?
I think having an ND, and if you are, if people are listening out there, life often feels harder than it does for others, and that makes sense. You've been navigating a world that wasn't built for you. You don't have to suddenly, after your diagnosis, if you do go for diagnosis or you self-diagnosed or whatever, love your neurodivergence or think of it as a superpower or turn it into a strength. Sometimes the most important thing is just not being so hard on yourself and noticing those patterns that you've been you've been battling with, and giving yourself space to exist and be you. And I think that alone matters.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, that perfectly encapsulates everything that we've done here today. And again, I could keep talking to you, but I will not. I will stop. So I want to thank you so much for coming back on. I've loved this. We are looking at further returns later in the year with some of our guests as well, because to be honest, we could have picked one of those questions, couldn't we, and done a good 45 minutes on that. But that's not for today. But yeah, thank you so much for the time that you give to us in this community. And if people wanted to work with you, how best can they do that? How can they find you?
So my Instagram is Therapist Edit, and on there in the bio you'll see my website. You can also find me in the counselling directory. But everything's in my Instagram handle on the bio.
Amazing stuff. I'll put the links in the show notes as always, guys. Like I said, go back down, listen to our first episode together. We're talking about the power of therapy for ND and a lot more about Steph's story too, which is really inspiring. So go and check that out. But yeah, one last time, thanks so much, Steph. I'm looking forward to having you on in the summer.
Thanks, Owen. Brilliant.
Amazing stuff. Thanks, Steph. Thank you, everybody, for listening at home. We really do hope these podcast episodes help you. And thank you to all of those that help us grow this social movement, which we are today. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode for more ND Chat.